Hello everyone, amateur meteorologist. First in weather here, it is July 31st, 2020, and here is another update on Hurricane Isaias. This is the 11 a.m. advisory from NOAA. As you can see, it is moving northwest at 16 miles per hour, and it is now officially a hurricane. So, a very small wind field of hurricane level sustained winds and a much broader area of tropical sustained winds. And as you can see, the main wind field is north of the storm and to the east. You just have a small area of the storm which has tropical storm wind strength to the south and west. And I think this is going to be important because with that interaction in Hispaniola, this northeasterly focused wind field will sort of exacerbate the sort of minimal wind impacts once you go 20, 30 miles inland, as those strongest winds will be concentrated in the eastern part. However, one thing I do want to mention is as the storm makes that turn to the north and the northwest, that wind field is sort of going to rotate to the east. So the coastline areas will be hit with the strongest winds, but that will only be about 5 miles inland. After that, you're going to be stuck in the weak side of the storm with those relatively weaker winds than the overall system. So again, to summarize, we do have Hurricane Isaias. The red indicates hurricane warnings all lined up. And I will say, in my video yesterday, I said I would be very surprised if this intensified into a hurricane, and how I disagreed with the National Weather Service that this would intensify into a hurricane before it made that northeasterly hook because of that dry air, because of that wind shear. But it has basically exceeded my expectations. I was really expecting this to stay as tropical storm, stay weaker until it really surpassed Florida. But no, it's actually intensified into a weak hurricane and actually might strengthen a bit. So definitely surprising there. And I think that might be some foreshadowing for how this storm is going to intensify and progress as it goes further in time. As you can see, the Florida coastline is also now covered in hurricane watches and tropical storm warnings. In the video yesterday, I said how I don't believe Florida is going to have a direct hit. Unfortunately, some of the models today actually are showing a direct hit with Florida, with the hurricane actually going about 5 to 10 miles inland, which is something I still disagree with. I believe that only the immediate Florida coastline is really going to see any significant impact from the storm, as it stays just offshore, and I'll explain why later. And then in the middle of the video, I'll go into the potential impacts for the Mid-Atlantic and also the Southeast and eventually the Northeast. Now, here are the latest 12Z ensemble guidance tracks. As you can see, only a couple models have it going inland into Florida. The majority of them have it just missing Florida, going offshore. And this is usually what you see because that is the path of least resistance. The hurricane or tropical storm is something has to force it to go inland, because a tropical storm never wants to go inland because that will weaken it. So it wants to go on the easiest path, and that is just offshore. Something has to physically force it, like a ridge, a very strong ridge, to force it to go inland. And I just don't see that happening right now with Florida. I think this is going to stay just offshore, still giving some pretty good impacts because keep in mind, if this is a hurricane, you are going to have some pretty strong winds, even on the west side, on the immediate coastline, just not inland. And then after that, the ensembles show this system making that turn, not quite making landfall in South Carolina, but most likely making landfall just in the southeastern tip of North Carolina or the southwestern or areas just southwest of the Outer Banks. And again, this is, I think, a pretty good idea. I think this is pretty a good forecast by the ensemble models, and then they take it into southeastern Virginia or just offshore, and then it continues its northeasterly track into Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. So again, this is not much has changed. The models are still keeping this storm offshore of Florida just barely, and then making landfall somewhere in this region right here. Let me just draw it for you guys real quick. So somewhere in this region right here needs to really pay attention because that's when the storm will be strongest, as it just makes landfall over there. Now, here is the GEFS ensemble precip, and so what this shows you is that the ensemble models have a pretty good, or are saying pretty confidently that this system is going to go like this. Where the purples are, that's where you can see where the majority of the model consensus is, and it really shows you where some of the biggest impacts could be in terms of rain and potentially wind on coastal sections. Notice how the ensembles don't have that much precip on Florida. Again, I think the only regions of Florida that will be really affected are the immediate coastline sections. So Again, I think this is really going to be a coastal hugger until it reaches South Carolina and North Carolina. Now, is the European ensemble, and this is where I start to disagree. See how the European ensemble actually has the system inside of Florida, and then because of that, it severely weakens it to a weak tropical storm. I just don't see this happening because if you look at the ridge right here, this dome is all the way to the east. Something has to physically force this storm westward into Florida, and that ridge is just not west enough or strong enough to really force Isaisis into Florida. And I think it's going to go just offshore and travel on the path of least resistance. And the GFS model ensemble even shows this with even more aggressively having it inland. But again, look at the ridge. It's even weaker on the GFS. I just do not see this system going inland into Florida. Again, I might be wrong, but as of now, I just do not see the system going inland into Florida with that ridge being so weak and nothing really trying to force the system into the Florida coastline. Now, here is the GFS model, as you can see. So one critical thing I think that is really playing a key role in this is this trough right here. So if this ridge, this dome right here, if this trough was not in existence, this system would just go offshore. It would hug the coastline, be about 20 to 50 miles offshore, go on the path of least resistance, and not really have too many impacts for essentially the entire eastern seaboard. But what I think is quite important is that this massive trough right here, what usually kicks those systems out to sea, is a bit too far to the west. And what that's gonna do is the trough. See how this orange shading essentially is connecting with this system. So what that shows you is that at the 500 millibar height, the trough is essentially merging with the system. It's pulling it inwards, and so because of that, it's traveling much further west than it would without that trough. If this trough was not here, this system would be going on a path somewhat like this. All right, it would just go out to sea, or not quite a northeasterly hook like this, more something like, let me illustrate it, something like this. All right, so providing much less impacts for the mid-Atlantic, southeast, and Florida. But because of that trough, it's going to really sort of force that system to move westward to really connect with this. And then those northeasterly winds from that trough are going to basically make it go like that. So unfortunately, because of that trough, I think we are going to see much greater impacts for the Mid-Atlantic and the Southeast states like northeastern South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Delaware, Maryland, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut. I think you are going to see some pretty significant impacts, especially on the coastline, because of that trough really pulling that system in. And the European has the exact same thing. See that orange shading right here? This system is going to go like this if it wasn't for that trough. But if we go now to the next forecast hour, which is 120 hours out, you can see that system is now firmly in that orange shading. It would actually be much further to the east if that trough was not there because that ridge is too weak. But because of that trough, it's pulling it in, and now it's going to go into the Northeast, into North Carolina and South Carolina. So I think it's looking increasingly likely that we are going to see some pretty significant impacts, heavy winds on the coastline, some pretty significant rains about 50 to 100 miles inland, especially in North Carolina and Virginia, and also the northeastern region, especially states like Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island, where you could see some pretty significant winds as that system moves in this northeasterly fashion. That eastern side is going to actually interact directly with those states. So I think I would caution the Northeast needs to remain stay particularly careful, because as that system, that western side degrades, that eastern side will still maintain some of those really strong winds. The problem is that eastern side will then directly smash into this landmass right here because it is kind of sticking out like a chin. And so because of that, I think we could actually see some pretty significant winds in these states right here because of that sort of that track it's taking. So let me mark it out for you guys where I think there actually could be some pretty significant winds basically in this circle right here as that easterly section of that storm really smashes into that region. Now, one other thing I want to talk about is the sea surface temperature anomaly. So this is where the Gulf Stream is, and this particular area where the Gulf Stream passes through is seeing anomalously warm sea surface temperatures. So almost one of the hottest areas of the ocean. You can see 30 Celsius temperature readings, which is as hot as all the way down south. And so I think if this system is intensifying now into a hurricane, it's struggling to maintain hurricane strength, but regardless, it is a hurricane. If once it makes that northeasterly turn, if it can interact with these very warm waters before making landfall into northeastern South Carolina or southwestern North Carolina, I think there is a good chance this could strengthen quite a bit in a short time span. Go from a Cat 1 to a Cat 2 potentially, or go from a strong tropical storm to a weak category or moderate category 1. I think it is certainly possible that right before this makes landfall, it is going to strengthen by 30, 40 millibars in pressure downward and really pack a greater punch in just those 12 hours because of those really warm sea surface temperatures. Not to mention, as it makes that northeasterly turn, it will now be in a favorable wind shear environment as that trough has prevailing winds also coming from the southwest, and as that system moves northeast, both those wind flows are completely parallel, unlike what we're seeing right now. And even in those perpendicular wind flows, the system is still strengthening right now, just barely, but once it gets into that more favorable wind shear environment with much less wind shear, I think it is certainly possible it can strengthen quite significantly, especially with those warmer sea surface temperatures. So again, I think North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, Delaware, Maryland, New Jersey, you guys need to certainly watch out now in the next 2 or 3 days what this system does. Florida, I think you're going to avoid a really kind of catastrophic hit. The coastline, I think we'll see some pretty good impacts, but the immediate coastline is what I'm trying to stress. Basically, after 10 miles inland, you're not really going to see much, just some wind, gusty winds and rain. But I think the main concern areas are eastern North Carolina, northeastern South Carolina, southeastern Virginia, eastern Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, and then especially Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Massachusetts as that eastern side of the storm smashes into you guys, which is the consensus in the models right now. So stay tuned. This is looking pretty interesting. Let me just mark out for you guys where I think the biggest impacts are going to be and where the biggest area of concern is. So again, the immediate Florida coastline, so this area right here, all right, and then essentially this area right here, and northeastward. So these areas right here need to pay really careful attention with this system. I think this could be a pretty significant tropical storm or system for you guys. And also northeastward, once you guys go to this area right here, this area needs to be pay careful attention. So again, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, guys. I hope you got some clarity with this. That this is looking like a pretty good, significant, impactful storm system, especially for the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast. So stay tuned, and I'll see you next time.